So when you've made a lot of groups within IN-SPIRE, one of the things you want to be able to do is compare and contrast the groups with each other. And now we already went over how to make groups and sort them and organize them in the video about groups. So if this looks like a big jumble of letters and colors to you, then go back and watch the groups video so that you understand how to make groups and put them in folders. This is the data set we've used before in these videos. This is Internet Movie Database plots from 2000 to 2010, and I've previously made these groups from queries that are locations, and then I have a bunch of groups that are occupations, and I have those into group folders. Now, one of the things that you can do is you can highlight a group, and then you can see that all of its colors will show up there, and then you can make a selection from that group. And here's a tip: if making a selection takes a long time because you have a lot of documents, you might want to turn off auto summarize. Okay, so I've made a selection out of New York City, and now you can see that all of the other groups show how many of their total match with New York City, so how many are also in the current selection. And so if we wanted to find out what occupations occurred in the same documents as New York City, we could go through and we could look at these numbers, and then we could find overlap, and then we could control click on some of them, and then that would show us the overlap, and we could make a selection from that. But that's a tedious way, and we don't have any sorting capabilities, and it would be especially hard if we had lots and lots of things. So let me show you a better way here, and that better way is in the correlation tool. The correlation tool is going to make a grid out of columns and rows. And so what we need to do first is IN-SPIRE is going to ask you which groups you want in the columns and which groups you want in the rows. If you already have them in folders and you just want to use all of them, all you have to do is select the folder and hit the arrow, and you can add it. And so now here's a quick way to add all of those groups that I had in those two folders. And when I press OK, it will lay those out in a grid. And so you can see here are all of my occupations, here are all of my locations, and then you can see the overlap between them. And we can make selections from these. So if I want to do police officers in Los Angeles, I can click on that, on the intersection of that, and you can see there are 78 that overlap, and then the document viewer now has 78 selected documents, and I can go read those if I want to. You'll see that it will automatically send the terms that were in these queries that made up these things into the document viewer's highlights panel, and so you can see why it chose to make those. And don't forget that every time you make a selection, those documents are also being selected in the galaxy. So where groups are very structured data, the galaxy shows you the unstructured data, and so you can see where those documents lie. You can do summarize to see the terms that contribute to those documents, and you can even use the shortcuts menu to show only selected documents and see what the topics are. Now, another thing you might want to do is, instead of just clicking one, you might want to click lots of them, and you can actually just drag a box through and make a selection. And so now you can see I have 435 selected. Now right now it's sorting these by the order that they were in the folders. And that's not always very useful, because you can see I have a pretty large one down here with editor and New York, and I kind of have to hunt through and look at the numbers to find these. So you can change the sorting here under View. You can change the sort to correlation order. And what this does now is the things that are more highly correlated will end up in the upper left corner here. And so this is useful if you want to say, you know, what are the most used occupations in New York City, for example, and then you could just make a highlight out of those. You could just highlight those and select them, and now I've got 295 movies that have New York and these occupations. If you want to find out if one of your groups almost completely matches another group, it could be hard to see in this default view, because what it's doing is it's showing these color bars in proportion to the biggest one. So one thing I can do is I can change this to normalize, and now you notice that the colors here have changed. So it's not just going off of this largest group now. The lines are actually all being drawn now within each row. It's not very useful in this one because all of these are pretty small compared to their numbers. For example, if we look at writer here, if I go back to the groups tool and we find writer, there are 964 documents that have writer in them, and the highest correlations here are 60 and 41, so that's a pretty small line. But if, for instance, there were 900, then this would be a pretty thick bar, and you'd want that to jump out. If you find one that you really like, you can go to the Shortcuts menu, and you can do Save As. So we can call this Location versus Occupation. Now, if you wanted to try out some other combinations, you can go under Edit and choose Row and Columns, and you'll get back to that chooser when the correlation tool first opened. And you can clear these out, and you can put whichever ones you want. They don't have to be, you don't have to put whole folders in, you can just put individual groups in. The other thing that you can do is, let me add just a few locations here to the columns. And now with rows, what I'm going to do is, let's say that you've already been looking at some things and you're interested in some very specific groups. Okay, you can choose Sync with Group tool. Okay, and then that will pull in whatever is highlighted in the Groups tool. And now as you keep going here, the correlation tool will update automatically. So it stays synchronized with whatever is selected in the Group tool. And finally, the correlation tool is affected by the time slicer. And so let me pull up the full location occupation one that we made. And if I open up the time slicer, you'll see that the time filter is active. It lets you know that you're not looking at the full data set. And right now I'm only looking at the year 2000. And so these numbers only relate to the movies that are in the year 2000. And then I can use the step button here and I can step through the different years. And so this is an interesting way to see if there's any kind of trend that you can pull out of things that are happening year to year. And just remember that when the time filter is active, it's affecting everything in the view. So if you want to go back to all of your documents, you have to close the time slicer. So that's a brief overview of the correlation tool, a great place to compare and contrast all the groups that you've made in IN-SPIRE.